Welcome into the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, presented by Full Press Coverage. I see that my co-host has spent absolutely no thought into improving his background. We're still waiting for something, anything. But you know what? I'm sort of getting used to the sprinkler aesthetic he has going on.
Yeah, you may think I'm in jail, right? I mean, because there's really nothing here that doesn't look like jail. Yeah, I could be in jail, actually. I'm calling you from, the Charles Street Jail, that doesn't even exist anymore. But, I'm at Cedar Junction.
I believe that's a hotel now, the Charles Street
It is
Jail.
a hotel, yes. The Charles Street Jail is a very high-end hotel.
Yeah, it's a nice one.
Yeah, I'm calling you from Cedar Junction. So, we only have so much time. They give me 2 hours a night to do a podcast, and then they put me back behind the cage. But I'm working on it. I think you gave me a really good idea that I should have my Mount Rushmore of favorite athletes, which would be Barry Bonds, LeBron James, Aaron Rodgers, and either Mario Lemieux or Roger Federer. Since we don't, in general, talk much about tennis, it might have to be Mario Lemieux. We, of course, only talk about basketball, but that could be something. Your background looks splendid. I like it. Looks really good. You've got the professional microphone. I'm like talking into a cell phone, but it sounds okay. It actually sounds pretty good.
I think it's good. Well, you are in jail, so what are you supposed to do?
I'm in jail, yeah. They're not going to let me bring a computer to jail, yeah. I mean, I was
wondering why you're so specific about the times. It must be 6:30 when we record this. No other time works.
Dinner is at 6, mashed potatoes, corn, meatloaf. That's what we had tonight here in the can. And then, I have to be ready at 6:30, and I've got to be out at 8:30 because that's when lights are out. So get it going, Jet. Let's go.
It's funny to me because you're like the nicest, most helpful person I know. So the thought of you being in jail for some reason, just like, what could you possibly do? Jaywalk? That would put you in jail?
No, I actually got arrested and spent 3.5 hours in a jail cell back in 1996. I'm actually a convicted felon, if anybody cares to know. And I'm not being funny here. That is the case. I don't know if I should really say this because maybe our leader, Ian Glendon, would either, hire me full time because it sounds interesting or would say, I can't have you working for me. But we'll get to that some other point. We'll leave that as a tease to talk about me being a convicted felon. I can vote, though. It was sealed, so I'm above that.
Was 1996 during your drinking days?
No, it was beyond drinking.
Oh, I was going to say that's why you ended up in a jail cell. That would picture it because I know you were a big drinker and you haven't. And since when? When did you stop? When was the last time you had a drink?
1992, December of 92. Yes, it was coming up on 29 years. So no, it had nothing to do with drinking. I was sober. I was just trying to make money, and they caught me trying to make money. But that happens. It doesn't help to have a vowel at the end of your name.
I was going to say, Sap, you shouldn't be so
many
blatant
times
about selling those tickets in front of the Garden that are no good.
Well,
they'll pop you for that every time.
It was essentially selling tickets, just different types of tickets. So we'll end it there. But it doesn't help having a vowel at the end of your name because as Italian Americans, we always consider the FBI as Forever Bother Italians. That's what it stands for.
I think that a lot of races would have that same gripe and would place the I with maybe a B for forever bothering black people or forever bothering, other people. But
except for Karl Malone, who used to wear the FBI hat. Another reason I'm not a big fan of Karl Malone's.
Female body inspector. That's what.
Yes, exactly. Well, that would probably be. That's more Deshaun Watson than Karl Malone.
No, Karl Malone has a lot of kids.
Yeah, he does actually. Yeah,
he had one kid who was in the NFL that he never even met before.
Yeah, he was kind of like Antonio Cromartie and Sean Kemp, like the father of our country.
Yeah. So don't let Karl Malone off the hook completely with that.
No.
His seed is very virile. But we have immediately gotten off track. Although Karl Malone did play basketball, so something basketball adjacent there. You insisted. Well, I'll say suggested we start with the Celtics today, Sap, because there's just no end for the misery that is the 2020-2021 season if you're a Celtics fan. Now they've lost 2 straight, both in pretty grueling fashion. Mm-hmm. You wanted to know what my plan would be for the Celtics, but you put on the unfortunate caveat of Danny Ainge and Brad Stevens have to stay. So I had to fix the team basically with a 100-pound weight tied against my ankle. That's what you want from me?
Ball and chain, can we call it that? The reason I said that is I get the feeling that, especially Danny Ainge, he's got that job for life. I don't think Rick Grossbeck is ever going to get rid of Danny Ainge. I kind of feel the same way about Brad Stevens, but there may be heat on Danny Ainge at some point to say, well, it's either me or him, so it's got to be him. And then, of course, now with Roy Williams retiring at Kansas, now the rumors will start floating. Maybe Brad Stevens goes to
he
Kansas.
was at Kansas, and then now he's
he
at
was
UNC.
at Kansas, at UNC. But also, it could be that if Bill Self from Kansas goes to North Carolina, maybe Stevens ends up at Kansas. Now, people are trying to make some connection. The reason Roy Williams went from Kansas to North Carolina, because he's a North Carolina guy. He was Dean Smith's most trusted assistant, loved Michael Jordan. I'm sure that Michael Jordan will have some say in who the next Tar Heels head coach is. And they love to stay within the family. So, again, that rumor starts floating. Oh, Brad Stevens could be the new North Carolina coach, or maybe go to Kansas if Bill Self ends up at North Carolina. And this would piss off the people in Indiana because they pursued him. And he said, thanks, no thanks. But the North Carolina and Kansas jobs are better jobs than Indiana.
North Carolina is probably one of the 3 best jobs in college basketball.
I would say Duke, North Carolina, and Kentucky. Probably the 3 best jobs.
I'd agree with that.
Yeah, and Kansas is probably at the top of the next tier. And then Indiana is like probably a 3rd-tier job at this point because it's it's not Hoosiers anymore. It's not what it was. When Bobby
irrational.
Knight was there.
It's like the Nebraska football fans. It's
exactly.
like they're living in the past.
Exactly.
It's not the way that it is anymore. But it's certainly intriguing. And happy trails, Roy Williams, terrific coach. Don't announce your retirement on April Fool's Day, you dummy.
True, very true.
90% of people didn't believe it.
Yeah. No, I know. I've
not
had
a good day to do it.
I've had this happen to me on April Fool's Day back in 1984. And we're eventually going to get into the show. But, when you said April Fool's Day, so I was 21 years old, about to turn 21 in 1984. So at that time, my favorite player in the NBA was Marcus Johnson. So this is well before social media. ESPN was just ESPN. There wasn't ESPN2, ESPN3, ESPN News. So, news didn't travel. So at some point, friends were calling me because that's the only way you talked with friends was on the telephone. We didn't have cell phones in 1984.
You don't have to lecture us, yes.
Okay, I'm just lecturing how old I am and how fortunate you are. But friends called me and go, hey, did you hear Marcus Johnson blew out his knee last night? He's done for the season. I'm like, oh, man, that's awful. I was like pissed off, because the Bucks were probably the 2nd best team in the Eastern Conference that year. They lost to the Celtics in the Eastern Conference Finals. And then they got back to me and said, oh, April Fool's. Like, oh, that's right, today's April Fool's. So 3 weeks after April Fool's, right around my birthday, I had tickets to see Al Pacino in American Buffalo at the Wilbur Theater in Boston. And Pacino's one of my all-time favorite actors. And actually, we share the same birthday, April 25th. He's 23 years older than I am. So I was looking forward to see him. The same friends called up a little bit later and said, hey, did you hear Al Pacino fell off the stage last night? His understudy is going to be filling in for the rest of the run. I'm like, oh, my God. I bought these tickets. I'm so psyched to see Al Pacino. They said April Fool's Day. Okay, I'm not going to fall for any more April Fool's Day jokes in 1984. Well, later that night, friends called me and said that Marvin Gaye was killed. And Marvin Gaye is one of my favorite all-time artists. And I would not believe it till like the next day when I saw it in the newspaper. Because, again, word traveled a lot slower back then.
Fool me once, and shame on
you. Right, fool me twice, shame on you. And fool me a 3rd time, shame, shame, shame. And Marvin Gaye was killed by his dad. And it was just like, I wouldn't believe it till I saw it the next day. So that was April Fool's Day, 1984. So you make a good point, though. Roy Williams probably should have waited until tomorrow to announce it, unless he didn't want to get it too close to the Final Four. But, yeah, I'm sure a lot of people said, it's just an April Fool's joke. But he's leading
still people in North Carolina just assuming that he's going to be there next season.
Yeah.
Just as a quick aside, a name to look out for, I would say, is Jerry Stackhouse. He did an okay job with Vanderbilt, but is an alum and very respected. Maybe he ends up there. I don't know. I'm sure that he would love the job. They will certainly inquire. And maybe they'll ask Celtic player Aaron Nesmith, who was coached by Jerry Stackhouse, hey, Aaron, what do you think of this guy? Which brings us to the Celtics. That's how I'm going to do it, Sam. Aaron Nesmith.
I like that.
1984 to Roy Williams, to Aaron Nesmith to the Celtics.
We're
6
good,
degrees
aren't we?
of separation. Very, very, very good. So again, you want me to do this with Brad Stevens and Danny Ainge staying. I agree with you. I don't think that Danny Ainge is going to get fired. I disagree that that's the right course of action, as I've made plainly clear on this show many times. But I do believe that Brad Stevens will be they will mutually part ways after the end of the season. They're not gonna can him. They're not gonna say they're gonna fire him. They're gonna say we came to this decision together. It would be for the best of both. But you can just see it in the team's eyes. They don't listen to him anymore. They don't try. They don't respect him anymore as a head coach. I'm sure he's a very, very nice man. Everybody seems to say very nice things about him. He's not the right coach for this team. The players aren't responding, so they have to do something. But we'll go in this scenario with they both stay, because obviously they are popular with the ownership group. We know what Grousbeck has said glowing things about both of them. So what do I do to fix the Celtics, Sap? That is a very, very tough question with that scenario. I do feel extremely hamstrung. The first thing I would do is I'd have a serious conversation with Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown and say, hey, guys, what do you think we're missing? You know, do you think you guys can continue to improve? Do you think we need another star player who's better than you guys? What type of player would it be? You need to have a real conversation and say, hey, you know, this isn't working. If this is what we're going to get, we're not going to be able to be competitive. So you need to have a completely honest conversation with those guys, as honest as you can. If you don't come away liking what you hear from that conversation, I think anybody is tradable, honestly. And so you have to see what players are available. But I'd have no problem trading Tatum or Brown for the right price. It's just a matter of if you do want to go in the direction where you're trading them to get somebody who complements the other guy. Because if you're going to trade them both, then you're just going to tank. But if you trade, say, Brown and you get Bradley Beal, that seems like the same thing. Bradley Beal's a better player than Brown, but he's not as good defensively. And I don't see that just Brown and Tatum suddenly turn you into a team that's a contender.
Jed, if you do that, now you've really empowered Jason Tatum, because that's his best friend,
Completely,
Bradley Beal.
yeah.
So now here's a guy who seems to be stagnant in his development this year. I think he was a better player at the end of last year than he is this year. The other night against Dallas, he was playing iso ball to the max. It was just infuriating to watch. There was one possession, the very first possession of the second half, where he had the ball for 22 seconds, went in the lane, floated it up, missed, and then he complained that he thought he was fouled. The other four guys went back on defense, and Jason Tatum was still complaining. And it looked like Carmelo Anthony, circa 2011 or whatever.
Yeah, really bad. That's a
really
good
bad,
comparison.
right? So it was very, very infuriating to watch. So now, if you reward him by going and getting his best friend, he's just going to feel that his shit is ice cream, right? At that point, like he's running the Boston Celtics, not Danny Ainge or Brad Stevens. So what about adding to the coaching staff? Because in this scenario, Brad Stevens remains as the head coach. Do you need to get a buffer in there that these players
I mean, I've been
respect?
advocating for that for years, but at this point, I think it's gone. I think last year they had their chance to bring in somebody like that, a former player, preferably a former black player, to the coaching staff, and they did not do that. So I think that ship has sailed, honestly. I think this season has been enough of a disaster, and the team has regressed so much to the point where there's no salvaging Brad Stevens as the head coach by supplementing the staff. The only thing I think you can do is if in this scenario where you're making me keep Brad Stevens, is you have to have some sort of roster upheaval, because just trotting out the same coach, same players, same GM, same everything, that's not going to work. I don't care, what people think about Tatum and Brown getting better next year, or Romeo Langford or Aaron Nesmith improving, Rob Williams improving. This team, even if all those guys improve and take a step up, this team isn't going to be able to compete with the Nets as currently constituted.
No.
So you need to make some serious roster moves, and you have to sort of decide one way or another. Are we going to try to enhance the core of Tatum and Brown, or try to develop a new core, or start from scratch? Those are your three real options: is enhance what you have, restructure what you have in terms of, you trade one of Brown or Tatum, or completely blow it up. I don't think that it's hard to walk away from guys who are young and seemingly have a few years of their prime, a lot of years of their prime left, but you have to take a serious gauge of, one, what your return would be for trading something like that, and two, if you keep them, how do you get to the point where you're competing for a finals? Because that's really the only goal in Boston, is not to be a competitive team that gets into the playoffs, but a team that's competing for the finals. So you have to look at guys that would complement their games, and how can you go out and get them? To me, the best answer would be you try to do something like what the Nets just did to get James Harden and offer up a ton of draft picks into the future to get an all-star player right now, like a Karl Anthony Towns, if the Timberwolves are even interested in something like that, whatever the next star to shake loose would be, and offer just an insane amount of draft picks, because you don't have the player capital to add to Tatum and Brown. You'd have to trade one of those guys to get a player. But if you were offering enough draft picks like this Nets trade, maybe you could get another star player in, and then maybe you'd be considered a team that can compete for the finals. So that's the first thing I would look at. And if I'm not able to do that, I seriously gauge what the value is for Jason Tatum. The value I'm looking for is a lot of picks and maybe a young player. It's a bad situation the Celtics are in right now. That's the reality of it, is that it seems silly they have two young all-stars to say it's a bad situation, but they're in the situation that you really try to avoid at all costs in the NBA, which is the no man's land, which is you're too good to be trying to get a top tier talent in the lottery, but you're not nearly good enough to be competing for finals. And so if you're bringing back the coach and the GM who would have the same vision, what do you really do about that? That's where I'm kind of stuck, is that I would like to bring in a third star and trade a bunch of picks, but it takes two to tango in a trade. You can't just say that's what I'm going to do.
What about in terms of smaller moves? Because there's a chemistry issue, and I don't generally like to use the word chemistry. Maybe it's character, lack of leadership, whatever the case may be. But if you can bring in a veteran or two that have championship DNA, I'm going to throw one name out. I don't think he's viable anymore. He's almost as old as me, it feels like. But someone like Andre Iguodala, who could come in, has won 3 championships. So when Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown don't want to hear about how tough it is to win a championship, he can flash 3 rings in their faces. Someone along those lines who has that type of championship DNA. Now, you would think Tristan Thompson could bring a little bit of that, right? Because he did win a championship. But the players probably look at him. He hasn't brought any of it. And look, he's still in COVID protocol because he can't not go out. Like, that's not leadership. And you don't think the players look at him and go, yeah, you won a championship, but you played with LeBron and you played with Kyrie Irving. So congratulations, you were along for the ride. You're not going to go get someone who is a champion that's going to get moved to you, because those players are so rare. I mean, you can go get Steph Curry to come in and right all the wrongs. I mean, I don't think that's going to happen for sure. I mean, my fun scenario was in 2022, 23, LeBron James comes here to wrap up his career. But I mean, of course, that's, pure lunacy, other than me maybe having too much fluoxetine one day and thinking that that's possible. But you get my point, though, bringing in somebody who's got that type of ability. That's why I was thinking, and we both kind of agree, that a former player like Kendrick Perkins would be good as an assistant coach, because if Tatum and Brown act up, first of all, Perk is 6'10" and mean looking as all hell, even though he's a big sweetheart. But I think that he could, basically look and say, look, young fellas, I played with Garnett, Allen, Pierce, LeBron. I know what it takes to be part of a championship team. Sit and listen, follow my lead, and I can kind of help you. But Jason Tatum has this contract that goes into effect next year, right? For what, $39 million a year? Like,
it's a lot of money.
He's basically untouchable unless they want to move him and probably not get as much back. I mean, he's got the Subway commercial with Draymond Green. He's pitching potato chips now, so he's like this big star. The girls like him. He's got
that's why I'm saying, Seth.
It's almost like he seems like it's almost like it's almost like a lost cause in terms of changing his approach at this point.
I do. That's why I think the ship is sailed again, to bring in the assistant coach, to bring in the veteran, because I think it sort of is what it is at this point. And like you said, the contracts are guaranteed, and the players are now established, and the Celtics have sort of been enabling this behavior for a long time. Again, it's not like they're doing anything wrong off the court at all. They're model citizens and good guys, and Jason Tatum seems like a great dad, and Jaylen Brown's a great leader in his community, but they're just not engaged on the basketball court and not showing the leadership that they need on the basketball court. And so, I think the only way, if you want to go the player mentor route, the only way I see it is a player mentor who's still good and still playing a big role in the team. So, and again, those players don't necessarily want to come to a team that's not in the mix for a championship, and they're not right now. So you have to find a player that's as good, if not better, than both those guys, and add them to the team without giving up one of those two. And that's really the difficult trick, is trying to get another player that's an all-star level player to a franchise level player without giving up Tatum and Brown. That's why the Nets trade for Harden was such a heist, because they gave up. I mean, they gave up LeVert and Allen, which those are fine players, but they really didn't give up much in the way of anything to acquire a top 5 NBA player. So that and that's why the Nets are so good this year, is because they just added to that core of Durant and Kyrie and didn't have to subtract something that was really, really. They didn't have to subtract from the core.
Could they have traded for James Harden by offering the Rockets Marcus Smart, Robert Williams, who has grown as a player this year? So at the time, he wasn't what he is now. But say Marcus Smart, Robert Williams, a bunch of first-round picks. There would have to be one other role player in there. Because, look, the Nets didn't trade Kyrie or Kevin Durant for James Harden. Now, Kevin Durant's the best player of this entire discussion, and Kyrie's more accomplished than Tatum and Brown. I'll make the case he's a better player than those guys. He can take over a game easier than those two players can without making it look so obvious. So they didn't have to part with either one of those two players because they added this third superstar who actually has been their MVP. Jared Allen, his ceiling is probably higher than Robert Williams because he's proven it for a couple of years already. And I would think Karis LeVert's a better rounded player than Marcus Smart. But those 4 players aren't that far off. So if you could have got Harden for Marcus Smart, Robert Williams, one other young player, and 3 first-round picks, and if that was the case and Danny Ainge didn't want to do that, then that's malpractice on his part. Because anytime you get a top 5 player, you've got to try to make that move.
Yeah, I don't think they could have, because I think the Rockets are probably looking at the Nets picks as more valuable down the line because they are older.
Sure.
So I would say they probably wouldn't have done that but if they had offered Jaylen Brown, it probably would have gotten it done. But then you're in the same situation where you have Tatum and Brown. You have 2 guys. You kind of need 3. So, Listen, if that's what the Rockets wanted, was Smart and Robert Williams and a bunch of picks, and they didn't do that, then absolutely shame on Danny Ainge for sure.
And I doubt that was the case, because that would not be enough to get it done. Ainge probably proposed that, and they said, no, we need a little bit more. And then the trade died because Danny can't make deals. He has to obliterate the opposition when he makes a deal. He fights over a second-round pick.
I'm just looking, Sap, through all the teams in the NBA and what stars could shake loose. It's hard to, outside of Karl Anthony Towns, who everybody has circled now, who's really going to shake loose that's going to be able to, you're going to add to that team and be super impactful. And I know that surprises happen all the time, but look at the star players in the league. They're pretty entrenched with where they are. Let's look at the top of the East. Those Brooklyn guys aren't going anywhere until they become free agents or whatever. Embiid and Simmons seem like that's working out. So, I mean, maybe Simmons gets moved, but the Celtics and Sixers aren't going to make a trade. Giannis just signed a big extension. He's not going anywhere. Jimmy Butler is getting older, and he's happy in Miami. Trae Young is the future of that Hawks team. And then you look at Bradley Beal, I guess could come loose, but is he really going to, change a team? Look at their record this year. Look at them, what they've been historically. And in the Western Conference, I mean, Devin Booker finally seems settled in Phoenix. The Utah have their 2 stars extended for a while. The Lakers have what the Lakers have. The Nuggets, Jokic isn't going anywhere. Lillard's not going anywhere. Doncic certainly not going anywhere. Curry's not going anywhere. So, who's going to shake loose here?
The guy they should have approached in the offseason, but it would have been a very difficult cost, was Chris Paul. I mean, if you put Chris Paul on this team with Tatum and Brown, I think he would be the leader that they would follow, right? But now what would you have to give Oklahoma City at that point? And we know Sam Presti. Could you picture a trade between Sam Presti and Danny Ainge, what that would be about? One guy wanting to hoard draft picks, the other guy wanting to hoard draft picks. I mean, it'd be a tug-of-war between the two of them. They have made a deal before when Danny traded Kendrick Perkins for Jeff Green.
Lose-lose.
That's almost
deal.
a decade ago, right? It ended up being a lose-lose for both teams. So that would have been the guy. You bring him in, maybe you send Kemba Walker to Oklahoma City because then it's 2 bad contracts, and whatever else you have to get. And that Chris Paul to me is miles better than Kemba Walker, because I think he's one of the best leaders in the sport, and he would, I think, put Tatum and Brown in their place. It may only last a couple of years because he does have a tendency to grate on people, but maybe that was the type of move. It's a difficult situation to be in. Someone has to get to Tatum and to a lesser degree Brown and let them figure out how to become leaders and make players on their roster better. They don't do that. Now, maybe they never will. There's not a lot of guys in the league that do that. Even if you add Karl Anthony Towns, what the hell has he ever won? Right?
No, he hasn't won anything. He's just hoping to acquire talent.
Yeah.
Again, that's someone that could be available. Yeah. I don't know that he will be.
I'm not saying it to you, but it's like everyone talks about Karl Anthony Towns. What did Anthony Davis win until he showed up with LeBron? I mean, that type of player is a great player. They're going to make the All-Star team every year. They're going to put up great numbers, but it doesn't translate into changing the culture of a team. You know, a Tatum and Brown going to really look up to Karl Anthony Towns. They're going to look and say, well, he's on the same level as us.
Right. You're just hoping that the collective talent sort of can outweigh that, I guess.
Right. And that's where you do have to make the coaching change, because we've seen that Brad has trouble coaching, these elite players. If you throw another one into the mix, it could really get bad. So, I mean, that's what I know I hamstrung you on this by saying Ainge and Stevens are going to stay. I think Ainge is here. Ainge is going to dictate when he wants to leave. I think he's got a job for life. It does seem that way. It does. But Stevens, I agree with you. It could be at the end of the year where they mutually part ways and he goes on to coach college. The only problem is, let's say North Carolina is where he wants to go. Are they going to fill that vacancy now, or are they going to wait till the end of the regular season? Or can you pull off something like this? This happened in football a long time ago.
I would be surprised. Sap, he could end up coaching another NBA team too.
It could be a team, but
it could be a team that's looking to completely rebuild. And so
here's a scenario that doesn't generally happen. Charlie Weiss was the offensive coordinator with the Patriots in 2004, and in November announced that he was going to become the new head coach at Notre Dame. And Belichick let him stay on the staff. They won a Super Bowl, and then he parted ways. First of all, he was the offensive coordinator, not the head coach. I don't think you can do that for the head coach. I'm Brad Stevens. I'm going to coach you for the rest of the year, and then I'm going to North Carolina. They don't listen to him now. Or why would they listen to him then when he's a lame duck coach? So I just wanted to throw that out there. And that basketball is completely different. I get that.
Yeah, in terms of also what I do for the Celtics, I forgot this one part, is that I would come up with some sort of phony injury for Tatum and or Brown and just rest them the rest of the season. I honestly,
really?
they're close to being in top 8 pick territory, which gets you a 20% chance at the top 3 or top 5, I think, if you're the 8th worst team. However they flatten the odds.
They would really have to blow up, though, to not
go
make
for
at least a play-in. Yeah, I mean,
I'd go for it at this point.
Whoever. Yeah, and then...
Because remember, the bottom of the East is a lot worse off than the bottom of the West. So if you're finishing... Right now, they're in 8th at 23 and 25. Right. They're 2 spots ahead of Indiana. They're 2 games ahead of Indiana. And 4 games ahead of Chicago. The 4 games might be hard to swing. But
it's actually 1 game ahead of Indy and 3 ahead of Chicago.
Okay,
the Celtics are 23 and 25. Indiana's 21 and 25, so that's 1 game. So they're 1 game ahead of Indiana for 8th, and they are 3 games ahead of Chicago. But then, who's the 11th team in the Eastern Conference right now? I believe it's probably Toronto. Yeah, they're
18 and
further
30
behind. Yeah, so the Celtics are 5 games ahead of Toronto. So they'd have to lose 5 games to Toronto.
Yeah, that's too much.
That's too much. There's
3
only
is
24
doable.
games left. Yeah, I mean,
3 is doable.
But if you're stuck at 10, now, I mean, does it work? This gets really complicated, but let's say they end up number 10 and they play Chicago in that play-in tournament and they lose. They now not qualified as a playoff team and they go into the lottery.
That's right. Yeah.
That's what happens. So root against them in that 1-game lottery. Hopefully they don't advance and, lose to, I don't know, Miami in the first round or whoever they would play, or Charlotte, or
so let's
team
just,
like that.
I'll give you the example right now, Sap. If they drop down to where this is via tankathon.com, by the way, which is a great website if you're interested in how these teams are getting lottery odds. So if they just say they flip-flop with Chicago and they end up in the position that the Bulls are in right now, you would have a 34% chance at the 8th pick, a 32% chance at the 9th pick, but you'd have a combined just about 6, 12, 18, over 20% chance at a top 4 pick.
Yeah, I mean, and you get lucky, and as we will talk about in a future podcast, Cade Cunningham is a player that you love.
Doesn't
Jalen
matter.
Suggs is a guy I love, but
it doesn't matter the player.
It's
the asset of having the pick, and then you could swing it for a player if you wanted to.
You could swing it for a player, right? I mean, now you have that if you want to go after Karl Anthony Towns, right? Although Minnesota is going to be involved in that as well, but certain picks are protected. Yeah, no, I mean, look, being where they are right now is the worst place to be in the NBA. Like, they may sneak in to the play-in tournament and lose that, or they may, even worse, win that and then end up playing
the Nets.
Play the Nets in the first round. I mean, how humiliating would that be?
Just waxed, just absolutely waxed.
You got Kyrie basically laughing at Brad Stevens. Yeah, I mean, or if you play Philly, although we got to see how Embiid is, they're not going to beat any of the top 3 teams in the East, whether it's in the first or second round. So what's the point there? And it could be, a humbling experience for Tatum and Brown, because they keep throwing out there that Tatum's gone to 3 of the last 4.
How's the season not been humbling enough?
I don't know if these guys get it yet. I mean, I still think the worst thing that happened to Jason Tatum was his rookie year. He's in the Eastern Conference Finals, Game 7. He dunks on LeBron James, and it's like, okay, let's put this guy in Springfield. His career is all done. And oh, by the way, the Cavaliers won that game, 87-79, and LeBron did have 35 points, 15 rebounds, and 9 assists. So the last laugh was on Jason Tatum and the rest of the Celtics. But it's almost like, I dunked on LeBron. Kobe says I'm his guy. I mean, that's a lot for a 19-year-old, right? So he again, as I said earlier, he thinks his shit is ice cream. And you got to kind of coach that out of him. And he went to Duke, which complicates everything.
It's tough to coach it out of somebody, and especially it's not going to happen with Brad Stevens.
No,
so again, in this scenario, you're making me keep him. But either scenario, if there's a new head coach or not at the end of the season, I at this point, I've seen enough. Like the election prognosticators, at some point they say I've seen enough, and they can call it state. I know this team well enough. I can call when they're going to win or lose games. By
you start betting on them, you can make some money, right?
I should start betting on them.
Yeah.
They have 0 chance of winning in the first round, 0. So why are they doing this to themselves? I'm telling you, Jason Tatum. You could say COVID fatigue, whatever. Jaylen Brown's dealt with like a hip thing the past week.
A knee as well.
Shut him down. And less so to
for
I'm not
24 games.
In the next play 10 more games and then shut him down or something.
Okay, here's the other thing though, from a business aspect, because you got to weigh that also. They've started to let fans into the building, 12%. And
I know they want the playoff revenue, but
also, your business partners may say, "What are you doing here? You're tanking."
No, I'm not saying this is what they're going to do, but I'm saying this is what they should do. This is what they should do.
Okay, well, so you're a very aggressive executive. That's what I like about you, Jet. You would take over.
Yeah, well, I'm smart. I would know how to run the team. Well, let me ask you this, Sap. How is what the Thunder are doing with Al Horford any different than tanking?
Yeah.
I don't.
Exactly.
They're admitting it. I don't know how they're not being fined or anything. They're taking out a guy who's been one of their best players this season and saying, "We're not going to play him. He's not hurt. We're just not going to play him."
And it wasn't like he was going to be bought out to go to another team. He's just
they won't even buy him out. Right. So
that's a problem. I'm surprised the league hasn't stepped in on that, because that's a non-competitive approach by Oklahoma City. Yeah, you have a great point. Yeah, I mean, I'm up for anything so that they're not stuck in this purgatory where, they're the thing with the Celtics right now is the bridge years with Isaiah Thomas and Olynyk and, Marcus Smart had a big role. That at least was enjoyable to watch. They were underdogs. They weren't as talented as other teams. Brad Stevens looked like one of the 3 best coaches in the league.
Yeah.
I mean, and now here you are, you've got 2 young studs that you think are going to be, great players, and neither one has been consistent showing that. And I think we saw that more this week. And I think this week has made it more frustrating, Jet, because Zion comes in and beats you, and then Luka comes in and beats you. And as good as Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown have been, they both made the All-Star team this year. Tatum made it the year before as well. They're not as good as those guys.
No.
They're not. I mean, Luka Doncic is at another level from those guys, and I think
I said this,
Zion is headed there too. So
I think
it's
we were
kind of
texting
frustrating
about this, Sap.
Yeah,
that I wouldn't if I would trade Brown and Tatum combined for Doncic, but the Mavs would say no.
Yeah, I mean he's special, isn't he? I mean he's just a special player. He's a generational talent, and I think Zion is too. So this week you got Jason Tatum essentially, hogging the ball, a la Carmelo Anthony, and you got Zion and Luka helping their teammates play better, and they beat you on your home court. That's a bad look for the Celtics and Jason Tatum, because I think his Q rating among maybe other players, although other players seem to like the kid, but I think it's going down a little bit. His Q rating off the court with Subway and Frito-Lay or whatever the hell he's selling for potato chips, that's going up. But
it's been
at some point you got to win.
It's been an incredibly revealing season for Celtics fans who thought that could be the core of a championship team, Tatum and Brown and Kemba. So, and I'm looking at the rest of their schedule, and because of the way they've played this year, Sap, I mean, you can't say any game you could chalk that up to a win.
No.
Like tomorrow against Houston, I'm willing to say, okay, they'll win that game. They play 2 against Minnesota, and then the rest of them, you're like, well, they could lose any of those games. Maybe not to Orlando. So 3. I have 3 games where I feel very confident they'll win. One of the 2 against Minnesota, Houston, and Orlando. The rest of them, I don't know. I have no idea. Like, they're playing the Knicks twice remaining. Why would I be confident they're going to beat the Knicks at this point?
The Knicks
or the
are
Hornets. Better.
The Knicks are better right now. Julius Randle is a better player right now than Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown. He's playing at a higher level than those two guys.
He's making his teammates better than they are.
Just look at his assist numbers.
They've got a bunch of junk in New York.
Yeah.
So
and Thibodeau's
it's bad.
It's
working. Bad. There's no easy fix, Sap. But I think I think that an aggressive fix would be to do what I said, try to tank a little bit this season. You can't get super far down, but you hope that you hit the ping pong balls, which historically the Celtics haven't really gotten luck with. But that's what I would do. And another thing that I talked about this months ago. If you want to go in a really weird sort of tanky direction, you could go trade Tatum to the Wizards, who they obviously would love Bradley Beal and Tatum to be there. Get Westbrook back, so you're be competitive now. Get their 2 of their young players, Hachimura and Avia from Israel, and a bunch of picks, and then say, Brown, those 2 young guys, Westbrook, a bunch of picks. We can rebuild from there. Tatum will be happy playing in Washington. You could go that route, and I'm sure the Wizards would be amenable to that trade because they'd like to pair Tatum and Beal. So that's something I could look at. But that you're starting over there. But it's got that same sort of vibe to me as those Bridgie Celtics, where you can be competitive, but you also can look to the future because you have younger players and picks coming your way. Just an idea.
No, yeah, I mean, it's good. You got to throw all the spaghetti up against the wall and see what sticks. Kind of reverse it. Instead of bringing Beal here, you send Tatum there.
Right.
Look, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was traded in his 6th year. Anything is doable in the NBA. That's when people say, this guy is untouchable.
No, there should be no such thing.
It's Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in 1975 was by far the best player in basketball and by far the best asset in basketball. There's not a lot of 7'2" guys that were skilled as Kareem. I can't count more than 2 on my hands, and that's him and Will Chamberlain. And they traded him because he didn't want to stay in Milwaukee. They tried to get as much back as they could. So when people say, well, Tatum's untouchable or Brown's untouchable, BS. Everyone is tradable at any moment because Kareem, one of the all-time greats, was traded right in his prime. So, yeah, look, if that works, you do know Westbrook is going to bust his ass out there. I don't think he is the player he was before, and then some of the things that make him infuriating to watch still exist. He's a poor 3-point shooter. He seems to play in a tunnel, but you do know that the guy's going to bust his ass every night. And then if you're getting young players back and a load of draft picks, then you just root against Washington and hope that you get a lottery pick or 2 in there and you start to rebuild. I think at some point they're going to have to shake something up, whether it be the coach, which is probably the easiest thing to do. In fact, it is the easiest thing to do, or move on from one of your 2-star players, split them up at some point. Because right now, this is not enjoyable to watch.
No, it's
That's the
awful
part
to
that's
watch.
even
Really,
worse.
Sap, it's awful. It's
It
like I
is.
said, it's a slog. Every game is like a nightmare. They don't learn their lessons from the past games. They don't do the things that would make them a good team. They're young and fast and athletic, and they don't run. They play this like half-court game. They huck up threes. They rarely go to the free throw line or try to attack the basket. It's an awful brand of basketball to watch. Really, they're a thoroughly unenjoyable team to watch. I was saying on my post game recap last night on the YouTube channel, YouTube/Jet Stryer, that it's like an abusive relationship they have with their fans, where they're doing just enough to kind of keep you on the line. Like, oh, they made this comeback, they fell just short. Like, go and look at what the Celtics tweet out after every game. It's basically the same thing. It's like, oh, the Celtics spirited, or the Celtics really tough, gritty effort, comeback falls just short. They've tweeted it like 30 times this season. It's basically the exact same
Are
thing.
they aware the game is 48 minutes? It's not 60 minutes like other sports?
So I'm saying, like, they're leaving you, there's like giving you just enough, like, well, they really tried. Well, they didn't really try. They just, that's recency bias. They tried the last 2 minutes of the game. If they tried the whole game, they would have won by 15 points. And so it's like the stuff in the offseason where it's like, you don't want Miles Turner and Doug McDermott. You want this traded player exemption because we're going to get a starred player. And then it's, well, look at what the value we got for Evan Fournier with this traded player exemption. They lie to you. They keep your fans. I'm telling you, Sap, it's an abusive relationship the Celtics have with their fans right now, where they're selling them things that is just an absolute bag of goods. Danny Ainge has become a snake oil salesman. The Celtics media have just come along for the ride. They've become, in my mind, in this town, the worst media group because they're just the least honest with the fan base. So
absolutely.
It's a problem.
And just some of the people who cover them, even, on the periphery. I was tweeting back and forth with someone today, and we're talking about Klay Thompson. I don't even know who it was. I think he's a half-ass fan. Everybody covers the team somehow. They got a blog or whatever. But there was a picture of Klay Thompson when he was a young kid, and it said that he was a Red Sox fan. And I said, oh, yeah, Steph Curry also is a Red Sox fan. And someone in the Twitter exchange said, oh, that means it's a done deal, Klay to the Celtics. I said, oh, that would be awesome. But Danny wouldn't part with Marcus Smart for Klay Thompson.
Yeah, probably
and someone
not.
Jumped down my throat. Maybe it's a burner account of yours. But someone jumped down my throat and said, I would never trade Marcus Smart for Klay Thompson. He's had knee problems. I said, Klay Thompson could walk up and down the court and be more effective than Marcus Smart just because he's one of the 5 greatest shooters ever. I think Klay Thompson's going to come back from these injuries. He's not a guy who creates his own offense. He doesn't dribble the ball. His usage rate is probably the lowest in the league. He gets open and hits threes. It's pretty good. But this, again, I think that's the mindset of the Celtics. Marcus Smart, I couldn't part with him for, Klay Thompson. And that trade scenario I ran by you of Marcus Smart, Robert Williams, draft picks, maybe a younger player, I bet 90% of the people that cover the Celtics, whether in, print or on radio or in the blogosphere, whatever,
right,
would not have made that trade. Oh, no, you can't give up Marcus Smart and Robert Williams for James Harden. James Harden, he's a Han. He's an MVP who's in the running this year, and look at what he's done with the Nets. That's talent. Talent wins in that league. And whether you like James Harden or not, he does get his team to the playoffs. Now, once they get there, they don't go as far as you think. But, he did go 8 straight years with Houston. He was blocked several of those years by Golden State like everybody else in the sport. These guys have not proven that they can be the guy. They were at their best when they had other players who, were more accepting of those roles. When they were like the cute young kids, in their first or second year, and you're like, wow, these guys are going to be awesome. It was kind of fun to watch. But now they've gone from kids to men, or at least they think they have, but they haven't really delivered the goods yet.
I just figured it out on the trade machine, Sap. Kemba Walker, which Jason Tatum and Tristan Thompson. So you're dumping a bad contract in Kemba Walker, but you're getting a bad contract in return. Russell Westbrook, Ryu Hachimura, Denny Avdija, and however many first-round picks you demand from the Wizards. Boom, trade done. I just made the Celtics competitive while getting good young players and a bunch of future draft picks.
And best for you didn't part with Marcus Smart, right? Because that's not going to happen if you're making any trade.
And I get Russell Westbrook, who I also
like.
like.
Man, you'd love that team, wouldn't you? Imagine Smart
I don't
and Westbrook
honestly
on the court together.
Trading Kemba, Tatum, and Thompson for Westbrook and those 2 young guys, are they any worse this season? honestly, are they any worse this season with minus Tatum and Kemba plus Westbrook?
Well, Westbrook's still putting up ridiculous numbers. It hasn't translated to any wins in Washington, but you know
They're
what?
in eighth
Tatum and
place
Brown
right now, so are they really
haven't
worse?
translated to wins either. Yeah, no, it's look, you come from the Rick Pitino school of just shake things up as much as you can.
Don't compare
Danny
me to
Ainge
him.
comes from best coach in college basketball, bar none, is Rick Pitino. Look at what he did. He's got the Iona program heading in the right direction. If BC had any balls, they would have hired him as their next head coach.
Oh, they'd never do it.
They're not bringing Rick Pitino back to Boston. Yeah, I mean, it is interesting to bring those points up. But Tatum is tantalizing, right? Because he's so damn talented. I mean, there's times out there he looks like Tracy McGrady. But let's also remember Tracy McGrady won one playoff series. There are some guys that are wildly talented, that put up great numbers, but it just doesn't mean anything.
Here's my overall point, Sep. They need to pick a direction. Are you going to go in the direction where you're going to go for it? If you're going to go for it, sell out, trade your picks, trade your complementary pieces like Marcus Smart, who I love dearly, but if it's going to get you a guy that you think you're going to contend for a championship with, do it. Sell out, compete for the championship, or go in the other direction. Do a complete teardown and start from scratch. Don't do what they're doing now, hoping for a wing and a prayer and trading player exemptions and Tatum and Brown growing and the coach growing with the team. Don't do that. That's not going to work. So this is ultimately, as a GM or somebody who's running a team, you need to pick a direction and then commit to that direction. The Celtics picked the direction of Anthony Davis and Kyrie Irving. It didn't work. They have then decided to just, play it as is, see what comes to us. You need to be aggressive and pick a direction. And Danny Ainge hasn't done that. So that's whether it's trying to compete for a championship right now and selling all your draft picks and your complementary pieces, great. If it's tearing it down and trading Tatum or Brown or both and getting a bunch of picks or younger players, great. But don't do this, because this is torture.
There's an old expression, shit or get off the pot.
Yes.
You like that one?
Yeah,
I summed up what you had to say in like 6 words.
Yeah.
So no, that's absolutely the truth. Absolutely. So it's a bad place to be in.
Yeah, it is, and they need to make some massive decisions this offseason, and I hope that they have the balls to do it. Really, I do. But I have my doubts. We were going to do some other stuff, but I want to move it to the next podcast. We've gone and done a lot of stuff on the Celtics. So I just wanted to ask you one quick thing before we finish this podcast, which is, does DeMarcus Cousins going to the Clippers on a 10-day contract actually make a difference?
Boy, that's a surprise question. I've always been a DeMarcus Cousins fan. I have. I think his game is fascinating. He's a big guy that's skilled. He's never really been in the best shape, which, is caused a lot of these injuries. He's got those old man injuries that have just crept up. I also think he's been so frustrating with losing. I think that's why he would act out, especially when he was in Sacramento. I mean, his teammates and even the organization spoke highly of him in the community and so forth. But look, he looks like he's really cooked. I mean, there were times a couple of years ago when he was with Golden State where he would flash, right? And look, he's going to a team that's loaded with talent. So if he can accept a role of I don't know, 12 to 15 minutes a night as a spark occasionally, maybe it works out. But it is a surprise that he's only getting a 10-day contract. A player of that ilk, you would think, would sign for the rest of the year. If it doesn't work out and he gets released, then someone else may give him an opportunity. But it does look like he's seen better days, and the injuries have really crept up on him. But it's a shot in the dark. The only thing I will say is, with Rondo there now, and I know they had a good relationship in New Orleans. New Orleans actually won a playoff series when they had Rondo, Cousins, and AD. Maybe that gets the most out of him. I think the move of getting Rondo in the Clippers was the most underrated move of the trade deadline, because he really hasn't played much this year. But
a lot of players think that too. Draymond Green was saying as much as well.
That was a great move.
Probably tampering again from Draymond Green, but
Draymond's pretty active all over the place.
Well,
but I think,
Seth, the reason I asked you the question is, one, I wanted to get an actual news story in here, and two, I think that Cousins is it plays well to what I was saying with the Celtics in terms of picking a direction, is a guy that was constantly talked about for going to the Celtics for years and years and years. And ultimately the Celtics decided to not, to maintain the status quo and not commit. And, maybe it worked out for them because Cousins got hurt, but you don't know if he plays here, if he gets hurt or not. So
Sure.
He's just another guy that reminds me of what the Celtics could have been had they gotten aggressive about trying to compete for a championship. The only time in Danny Ainge's tenure that he's been aggressive in trying to compete for a championship was the Garnett trade. Really?
Exactly. Yeah. Pretty much it. I mean, the Isaiah Thomas trade was under the radar. That wasn't
trying to compete for a championship. That was just making a move he thought was smart. But I'm talking about an aggressive, let's go out and get it move. And so
that's it.
Cousins, every time I think of him, that's what it reminds me of is what could have been had he been in his prime and the Celtics went out and aggressively got him. I don't know, but we'll never know.
No,
I also don't think he's going to help the Clippers for whatever.
No, I mean he's like 31 going on 41 because
it's not an attitude thing or motivation thing either.
No.
I just think he's physically cooked.
Body breaks down, especially at that size, a big man, and he's had a lot of injuries. And I've always liked the player. I really have. I think people misread his competitiveness. I think he wants to win. It's just sometimes you're in situations where you don't win, and it's frustrating.
Yeah. So I think that, we'll probably see him, I would guess, not get a 10-day contract, but I don't know. And, I'm frustrated with the Celtics, Sap. That's the real takeover from this podcast is that I've racked my brain, and the best solution is to be aggressive one way or the other. And like you said, shit or get off the pot. I fully agree with that. So that being said, we are the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, presented by Full Press Coverage. In our next show, we're going to talk not about the Celtics, thank God. We're going to talk about some interesting social media feuds because the NBA, they do a lot of things well. They do this better than any league going. They do this better than TMZ. Social media feuds are the NBA's bread and butter, and we got a good one. So make sure you check out that. Check out the podcast on fullpresscoverage.com, and other great podcasts and articles are on fullpresscoverage.com. We're also up on YouTube. Like I said, youtube.com/JetStryer for the video version of this. If you like looking at us, we're not doing like interesting things, but you can look at us and engage. You can pretend when we're looking in the camera, we're looking deep into your eyes. So yeah, check all that stuff out. Again, we are the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet Sapp, presented by Full Press Coverage. See you, everybody.